Hey everybody, I'm Patrick Veroneau, and thank you for joining me on another episode of Learning from Leaders. And on today's episode, we have a repeat guest. This is Tom Dahlborg. He was first on discussing his new book at that point, The Big Kid in Basketball. And on this episode, what we talk about is his second edition of this book, which was based on some additional conversations that he had with his son, Tommy, who the book was about, after the first publishing. And pretty significant stories. And that's really what drove him to say there was more that he needed to do. It's like he said he continues to learn the impact that bullying has. And that conversation not only deals with the story with his son, Tommy, but also goes on to look at bullying in other areas. How do we address it? How do we identify it? And how do we make the environments, whether it's at school or in the workplace, better for all of us? So let's get into it. Tom, I want to thank you for being back on the podcast again. I had to go back and look. The last time that we were on was December of 2018 when we were talking about the release of your first book, The Big Kid in Basketball. About 2 months ago, I saw a post of yours about an updated version of the book. And I thought, what a great opportunity to come back on and have a conversation about that. And you were kind enough to do that. So welcome back. I'd love to have a conversation about really what prompted you to take another crack at this book.
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation to join you here. You have a terrific podcast and terrific messages around leadership and so much more. And I appreciate being here. So the first edition of this book, which I hadn't intended to write, but because of people who had read some journaling and some blogs I had done around bullying and around coaching and parenting, they said, you must write the book. So I put that out there. And it was really interesting, Patrick, that it really got a lot of traction. And so lots of news stories. I was asked to go speak and TV and all these other things, not only in America, but beyond. And so was doing that for about a year. And then my bride and I, we were out on our deck and one day, and my son, Tommy, who you know, came out to us. And The Big Kid is really Tommy's story. It's Tommy and my story about him being bullied predominantly by adults and how we both grew through that situation and some of the things we did. And so again, about a year after the first edition of the book came out, my bride and I are on our deck. Tommy comes out and he says, Mom, Dad, I need to tell you something. Now, when I wrote the book, it's really about his age from 8 to 18. Now he was 25 coming out to us and telling us something. And he said to us, you know, back when I was in fourth grade, I put a belt around my neck. The pain was so great from the bullying that I didn't want to live anymore. And Patrick, I had no idea. We had no idea. So you talk about being humbled. So I wrote that book. I'm getting all this press and hopefully helping people. And then I realized I had no idea the extent of the pain my son was going through, had gone through. It really made me take a step back and really think about the messages. And it was another call to action to take it to the next level. So the first edition of the book is really a story and lessons through a story, through my son sharing that with my bride and I, and continuing to speak and share and learn. I was learning so much more that I didn't know when I wrote the original book. Because again, I didn't intend to. It wasn't like here's how to. It was more of a journaling process, a healing process for Tommy and I. And so I decided that with this additional humility and all these additional lessons learned, I wanted to help more so. I wanted to provide to people the what to do's and also the what not to do's when it comes to bullying, when it comes to how we can best be supportive of children, when it comes to helping children deal with adverse childhood experiences and ideally amplify positive childhood experiences to help them have a healthier life, both short-term and long-term. So that was really that call to action. It was really that discussion on that deck on that particular day.
It's interesting. You talk about adverse childhood events. And in one of the highlights that I read, you talk about ACEs, which for those of people that might see that acronym, that's what that stands for. And I think there's a lot more research done in terms of connecting the impact that ACEs have on kids, right, throughout their development.
It's so true. Now, bullying is now being included in ACEs. Right. Historically, it wasn't. And it's really about drugs and parents who are divorced and incarcerated parents and a lot of different forms of abuse and so forth that the child is experiencing themselves or they're witnessing. So there's tons of research on it, and I'm blessed to know a lot of experts in this field that I get a lot of information from. And what I've learned over this course of events, over this course of time, was that one of the best things we can do as parents, as coaches, as human beings in a community is, again, amplify, help children have more positive experiences to counteract the adverse childhood experiences. And coming out of Johns Hopkins, some of the latest research is all about that. It's all about creating those positive opportunities. It doesn't mean sugarcoat everything. It doesn't mean everything is roses, but rather it's about that love and that caring, and that compassion, and those opportunities to help a child grow in a very positive way, which sometimes means tough love, as opposed to, or to counteract, as I noted, the adverse childhood experiences.
Yeah. I can't remember if it's a researcher named Barbara Fredrickson, and I don't know whether she's one of the ones that's out of Johns Hopkins or not, but she does a lot of research in this area of positivity that talks about the number of positive events somebody needs to experience just to nullify a negative event. You will often see either a 3-to-1 or a 5-to-1 ratio of 3 positives to a negative just to get to neutral.
Exactly. It's so interesting because you and I work in healthcare, and so the books are about me coaching young men through basketball and life's lessons and so forth. I also get to coach leaders in healthcare. And it's interesting, to that point you just noted, that there's so much focus on accountability in healthcare, which is great, and about feedback, which is great. And yet, to your point, the feedback typically is in healthcare is negative. It's, you've done something wrong, you need to fix it. And even with working with adults, it's 3-to-1 that you need to provide people with positive reinforcement for the good thing, the real good thing. Don't make them up. Don't make them up. The real good things that they're doing for every opportunity to improve. And what they're finding through the research from the individual you had talked about and others is, for the newer generations that are coming into leadership positions, it's more like 7-to-1 as adults. And so, yes, when we think about these children we have the opportunity to impact, it's really, again, it's not all about roses, but it's about how can we truly create an environment in a community that's healthy and allows them to experience positivity more so than so much of that negativity they're experiencing in so many different ways, and especially nowadays.
And I'd love to talk about the adults too, especially in healthcare, because bullying has its own ramifications there that go far past just the interaction between the bullier and the person being bullied. I mean, patients are at risk significantly in those situations. But when we talk about bullying in school, what about the bully? And I ask that from the standpoint of, as bullies, those individuals often, they are that way because of a lack of happiness in who they are, right? And I will speak from my own experience. I remember as a kid times where I clearly would say I was a bully. And if I look back on those moments when I behaved that way, had nothing to do with the other person. It's because I was insecure with who I was. I wasn't happy with who I was. And they were the outlet for me to not feel good about myself.
And you're so right. In The Big Kid in Basketball, in that book, both editions, I talk about a time when Tommy had been bullied. And just to your point, oftentimes that person who had been bullied in the past becomes the bully of the future, or the abusee becomes the abuser. And luckily for us, it didn't happen with Tommy. And in fact, I tell a story about being on the school bus and one of his friends being bullied, and Tommy standing up for his friend, because being there for another while they're being bullied makes a big difference. And we all need to do that, both as adults and as we can need to help children do the same thing. But then the next day, and this floored me, Patrick, when I learned this, the next day, Tommy went to the 2 children that were bullying Tommy's friend to make sure they were okay. Because you're right, these children, and we found out later, one of them was from a very abusive home. They're acting out not because of the target, but because of how they feel. And Tommy says it so well. We need to be caring for and loving the child that's being bullied, and caring for and loving the child who's doing the bullying. Hold them accountable. The behavior is unacceptable, and yet still help them deal with what they're dealing with that's manifesting in that behavior. So you're spot on.
Yeah. I heard This was an African proverb that says that the child that's not accepted by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. When you think about that, the power that's there, right? Child that's not accepted by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth.
Absolutely. I haven't heard that before, and that's incredibly powerful.
When you think about that, right, these people that feel as though they've been outcasts. And again, it's not to make excuses for it, but when we see even adults that do just unbelievable things in a workplace setting, they harm coworkers or murder coworkers. And oftentimes when you come back to it, you find out that here's a person that felt ostracized. They weren't accepted as part of the group. Not the right approach, but this is how they deal with it. Right.
Exactly. And that's why we need to learn to love all.
Yeah.
Hold accountable, love all, and really address all the negativity out there as best we can. Because if we don't, that cycle of events is going to continue and continue, and people are going to be hurt. And that's the last thing we want to see.
So, Tom, when you mentioned that Tommy comes to you and says, this is really what happened in fourth grade, and now you're back at it again saying, I need to do more in the next version of this book, what things do you know now that you'd say, this is what you need to be aware of as a parent?
I think one of the biggest learnings for me was what not to do. Because I remember when Tommy was being bullied, and my bride and I were like, we thought we were the worst parents ever. And every time we tried to help, we seemed to be making things worse. And in fact, there's a story. There's a child, his name is Seven Bridges, and he had 26 surgeries. He ended up with a colostomy. He was bullied by his peer group in school. And similarly to how Doc and I felt, my bride and I felt, his parents tried to go to school, tried to do all these things, and everything made things worse. Yeah. This poor child did end up committing suicide. This poor child. And so, again, Doc and I, every time we thought we were taking a step forward and to make things better, we were making things worse. And then I leaned in, just like when you think about high reliability organizations, defer to the experts, lean into the experts. And I did so through the National Institute for Children's Health Quality. And I learned some of the things that do more harm than good. Because we all have all these good intentions. We want to make things better for our own child, but for other children. So as an example, zero tolerance policies actually make things worse. It sounds great. It looks great on paper. And yet, when you really start to put it into action, what happens is, as an example, and this goes for both, like, say, a healthcare system, a hospital, but also a school or a youth sports group or whatever it might be. What happens is the threat of someone else being suspended or expelled from a school actually discourages the other children from reporting what's actually happening to them because of concerns about ramifications and repercussions associated with retaliation, exactly. But also they don't want to be that one that did that. And so it actually decreased the amount of reporting of bullying. And then now add to that, and more recently, what they found was zero tolerance policies that punishments for minority students were actually more severe. So talk about another unintended consequence. Wow. And so it was these types of things that I learned over time by being out there and listening that I said, okay, I'm getting it. I'm not there yet, but I'm getting it. And I can share some of the wisdom I've heard from others with others. So in the book, I talk about a number of things that we shouldn't do. Good intentioned, but we shouldn't do because it leads to the exact opposite outcome that we're seeking.
You also talk in the book around coaching. You talk about the non-X's and O's.
Yeah. So I got into coaching because I wanted to help my son. And I didn't intend to be a coach. I played organized sports and stuff. I didn't intend to be a coach. And so I remember at first trying to help my son and then trying to learn the X's and O's far beyond just a player, but from a coaching perspective. And over time of coaching 10 years, I learned that was the easiest part of the job. Learning that, as an example, that young boys or young men have body image issues. I had no idea. I actually tell a story about totally being blindsided or my own fault and not having a clue, but learning how to manage and help children with body image issues. I had a child who was being abused at home that ended up living in a mechanic's garage. And he wasn't showing up for practices. And then he missed a couple of games. And here I am going to hold him accountable. And then similar to what we were talking about before, then I realized what was really going on. He was missing games, missing practices because of the abuse. So I'm going to hold him accountable to like I would hold someone who wasn't dealing with those types of challenges, hold them the same way. No, you need to understand. I learned how important relationship was in coaching to your players and their families, how much creating a safe place for those real nuggets of wisdom, those real nuggets of truth to be shared. It was far beyond anything I could have expected. And again, I've learned so much and I continue to learn so much. And I'm trying to help others learn at the same time.
I think being a coach is a huge responsibility for kids. And I can only speak to it from coaching my two sons at this point, because I know nothing about lacrosse, and that's my daughter's wheelhouse. I'm lost at that, or I would have loved to have coached her. But the thought of coaching was not about making the kid better in the sport. It was trying to provide them with skills to navigate life better. I mean, that to me is the responsibility that we have as coaches. They don't remember the wins and losses the most part. They're going to remember how a coach made them feel though.
Absolutely. So you had a great perspective going into coaching, and I learned more and more of that perspective as I was in the coaching and far beyond. But you're spot on.
And as you probably see now, you look around and you see the damage that so many of these coaches do to these individuals. As a parent, it's hard to watch, but I will tell you, I can speak from all three of our kids at this point in terms of sports. Things don't always go your way. And to me, that's the other part that I love about sports is it's our job to support them in every way we can as a tool to navigate them. We were never the parents that called the coach to say, hey, how come Noah or Grace isn't getting more playing time? If you want more playing time, that's your role to go to the coach and ask them, what can you do to improve the chances of getting more playing time, but not, when can you put me in again, coach? I think those are important lessons.
Absolutely.
Probably along the lines of bullying, right? Is parents, those of us that are around that can support that, is how do we provide them with the tools longer term, right? To deal with people that are not kind.
Exactly. And it's one of those both hands or all the above. We as parents need to position our children, just as you just described. And we also need to be cognizant of the coaches themselves. There are incredible positive coaches out there. And then there are some that just don't get it. And so again, working with the National Institute for Children's Health Quality, I actually developed what I call the 10 steps for benching bullying by coaches, because 42% of kids, almost half of children, report being bullied by coaches.
Yeah.
And it's up to us as parents, as a community, to really keep an eye on the coaches. And like you said, also position our children so when the coach is a good coach, and maybe they're a hard coach and they have high expectations, beautiful. Thank you. And I'll work with my child. Yeah. And then if it's a bullying, abusive coach, totally different story. And we need to address that as well. So it's that both and.
Tom, if you would, I'd love to make sure that we have that link, and I'll put it up in the show notes in regards to the steps to bullying, if that's possible, of benching bullying.
Absolutely. I'll provide that to you.
I think
and for a lot of these resources, and also for the book, very quickly, tbkid.org. So it stands for thebigkid.org. So tbkid.org.
Great. And where else can somebody get the book?
It's on Amazon as well. The easiest, if you go to tbkid.org, there's two links there. One is directly for the hard copy. One's there for the Kindle version of it as well. And that's probably the easiest way to do it.
Yeah. And we always appreciate that, going right to the site. I certainly understand that. What would your recommendations be going back to the healthcare side of this? Because again, I'm seeing this more and more in this environment with all of the stress and lack of resources. I've seen an increase in maybe not straight up bullying, but certainly disruptive behaviors. And we know also that Joint Commission published, I think it was in 2020, their assessment of 6 components to creating burnout in a workplace setting, and bullying was one of them.
Yeah, it's a huge issue, and it's becoming larger and larger. And in fact, I did a presentation not that long ago with a hospital system in Massachusetts, and we were talking about this very thing. And some of the things that I highlighted for folks was, number one, role model. We need to ensure that leadership is role modeling the appropriate behaviors. That isn't happening. It's a lost cause. And what I have found, and others have found, is many times it's the leaders that are actually the root cause for some of the behaviors that are. I see you agreeing there. So maybe I'll pause for a minute and maybe you could share a little bit of what you've seen out there.
I would completely agree that I often will go to the values that these organizations post up there and ask them to go through those values and look. And if you have accountability or collaboration or respect or integrity as values, yet you have And I'll just use an example of a physician or a surgeon that is treating employees in a way that is counter to that. You're not living your values. And what you're doing for the rest of the organization is saying that in one of these cases, it was as point blank as to say, what I want you to do is if this surgeon behaves this way and nobody's going to do anything about it because we're afraid that if we get rid of this person, there's a revenue stream that's going to be lost, is that you let people know within the organization that if you bring in over $3 million a year, you're exempt from values. You can do whatever you want and see how that goes, right? And because essentially that's what you're saying, that it doesn't matter. Once you get to this income level, values are off the table. And it sounds absurd, and it should. And we're seeing this more and more today. It almost, and I don't want this to sound the wrong way, like I enjoy seeing this idea of the great resignation, but I think what is finally being realized is that people are not going to tolerate this anymore.
Yep.
I'm not going to do this anymore. So now is an opportunity for these organizations to finally say, we have to walk the talk.
Absolutely. And I'm thrilled that you went that direction because number two, it's those values and the associated, just like you said, behaviors with those values,
right,
and developing those or reconfirming those with the team, not in some leadership retreat only, but including the actual team. You know, I'm married to an amazing nurse and I work with nurses a great deal. And how often do I hear from the nursing team that they have no idea what the values are or where they came from or what the behaviors are associated, expectations are associated with the behaviors. It blows my mind. Then we blame the nurses for some of the bad things that are happening there when they've been totally out of the loop. And like we were talking about earlier, with your quote earlier about burning down the community or
the village.
The village, it's like, what do you expect?
Right.
I mean, don't get me wrong, to hold people accountable, but yet we've created that. I know you and I've talked in another podcast about the 94-6 rule. We as leaders created the system that led to those outcomes. We were successful to get the outcomes, good or bad, that we get. So I'm thrilled you went that direction.
Yeah. Along those lines, I would say that, and I'm seeing this in certain hearing, the focus on benefits and bonuses to keep people. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for making sure that there's parity there or people are being paid fairly, but that's not our way out of this. Bonuses are not the long-term solution. It's behaviors.
Right.
That's what's going to make the difference where you create an environment where you attract the best talent and that talent wants to stay. It's not bonuses. It's not benefits. Again, as long as they're there, it's behaviors.
It's so true. And I remember I wrote a piece some years ago for Hospital Impact, and it was about financial incentives in healthcare. And the research shows that the more we tie things to benefits, bonuses, other financial incentives, the more so we take heart, we take caring, we take compassion off the table. And now instead of this intrinsic, I want to do what's best, it becomes this extrinsic, pay me more, give me more, give me more.
Right.
Not that these people are bad people. We leaders created that system. We created that outcome. And you're right, we need to change that as far as how we fund everything within healthcare. And we need to role model those values and behaviors and treat people with love and caring and compassion.
Yes, without question, it starts at the top. If you're not modeling those on a consistent basis, why would you ever expect anybody else within the organization to heed those?
Absolutely.
It's just words in a folder.
That's right. That's right.
Tom, as always, I've enjoyed this conversation with you so much. There's so much going on right now. I would guess there's going to be another revision at some point down the road, or maybe a different book altogether, but I look forward to the next conversation we can have on that.
I appreciate that, Patrick. I appreciate you. And like I said, the message that you share and what you live your values every day. And I appreciate that. You make a difference. So thank you for having me on. And I look forward to that next discussion.
Well, thanks. Enjoy.
Take care.